millions and millions of opening in chess. There are millions of openings and variations. If you guys find it difficult or hard to memorize everything, and you just want to know that one setup that would work in all the situation, in all the variations, no matter what your opponent responds, then you are going to enjoy this video. Stay tuned for this video. Stay tuned till the end. I am going to show you various variations, how you can use the same setup in any move that black plays. So the opening that I'm talking about today is the London system. It starts with d4, and if opponent replies with his pawn to d5, then you are going to play your bishop to f4. The London system setup is where you have your pawn to d4, pawn c3, pawn e3, and bishop on the f4 square. The main idea for London system is you want to take control of these two important squares, the e5 and e4 square. This is your main target. Give a setup like this, a London system, the pawns look like this there, and the bishop is here. This is what the London system should look like. Okay, now let's have a look at the various responses what the opponent can do. After bishop to f4, there are moves like he can play his bishop to f5, copy you, or the most common response is to play the knight to f6. If he plays his knight to f6, then you go with your pawn to e3. Okay, now when he plays his pawn to e6 or pawn c5 or knight c6, there are n number of lines there what he can do. But main idea here is to play the pawn to c5. He plays his pawn to c5, you just try to solidify the center and play a pawn to c3. So remember the setup that I was talking about? This is that setup. You have your pawns like this and the bishop over here. Okay, the bishop is out of that pawn chain, and this is a very good position for white. Now talking about these three minor pieces, where are they going to go? So the knight goes here, the bishop will go here, and the other knight goes to this square. This is the setup that you would want. But you have to be very careful with the move order. You only play a knight to f3 when the opponent has played their pawn to e6. Now there are various ways that I will why you should play a knight to f3 only after he had played his pawn to e6. Okay, continuing this variation a little forward, let's see what plays his knight to c6. Then you first start, see, he has not played his pawn to e6 right now. Correct? So there's no point of going with the knight to f3. I'll tell you why. Because if you play a knight to f3, then he can start his attack and give you an attack on the b2 square. Now defending it with any other piece looks impossible, so you'll have to go and give away the queen on the b3 square. If he exchanges, then it is good for you, but if he's not exchanging it, instead he's trying to give you an attack by pushing his pawn up on the c4 square, then you'll have to go back. Then he can bring in another attack, and he can play his bishop to f5. Here if you capture the bishop, then your rook is gone, because queen will capture on the b2 square, and there's no way that you are coming back. Right? Okay, let's say your knight was not played on the f3 square and you play your knight to d2. Then also if he plays his queen to b6, then you can defend it with your queen to b3 if he pushes his pawn to c4, and you can go with and then you can go with your queen to c2. Here he cannot play his bishop to f5 because you are going to capture it. The time he captures, then you can play a rook to b1 and you are saving the rook. So that's the difference of why you should not play a pawn to e6. Now, one simple reason is if the pawn is on e6, then the bishop cannot come up. Correct? So, we'll have a look when you are playing your knight to f3 first. This was when he plays his pawn to c5. Now, let's have a look what if he's playing his pawn to e6. As I'm continuously saying, you have to play your knight to f3 only when he plays his pawn to e6. So this is the time. You first do the London system setup. You play your pawn to c3. He plays his pawn to c5, and now you go with your knight to f3. If he plays his knight to c6 there, then you develop the other knight. You bring in the other knight. Play your knight to d2. He would want to castle. If he plays his bishop to d6, then you don't need to exchange it soon. You just can come back with your bishop on the g3 square. But if he plays his bishop to e7, then you can develop your bishop first. You can go with your bishop to d3, or you can also play a pawn to h3. Let's say you go with the bishop to d3, he castle, and then there are various ways of how you can set up an attack. You can start it by playing your knight to e5. He captured, then you don't worry about the double pawns. You are kicking this knight away from here. So you have to capture it back with the pawn. The knight goes back, and then you can play your queen to h5. Now there are so many attacks that you can give on black here. See, this bishop is eyeing over here. Now if he pushes his pawn up, maybe somewhere like this, then in future you can also try to give some threats like this if you find it worth playing so. Correct? Okay. This was when he's playing his bishop to e7. Now let's quickly have a look. What if he plays his bishop to d6? You're going to go back, he capture, you can capture it back. Right? If after he doesn't respond with the pawn to d5, instead he plays his knight to f6, then what can you do is you can play a bishop to f4. We are going to follow the London system, the same setup for everything. We are going to follow the London system, the same setup for everything. If he plays his pawn to g6, idea is to fianchetto his bishop over there. Then you first play your knight to c3. Now we are not going for pawn c3, but instead knight to c3. Now what's the idea behind knight c3 is you want to get control of the center. Controlling the center is the utmost important thing. So you want to control the center. Now if he plays blindly and if he plays his bishop to g7, then you're going to go pawn e3. Later your idea is to play queen d2, castle on the queen side, and you can also plan some moves like bishop h6 in the future. Here if he defends that pawn from going forward on the e5 square by playing his pawn to d6, then follow the same setup. Now instead of first playing pawn e5, you play queen d2. He castle, you also castle on the queen side, and this is a very good setup you see for white here. Okay, let's have a look. What if he's not playing blindly? If he's not just following the moves, if he's not playing his bishop to g7, instead he's playing his pawn to d5, not allowing you to come to the e4 square. In that position, you can go with your pawn to e3. Now, if the bishop comes to g7 square, you go bishop e2. Your idea is simple, that you want to develop all your pieces and give him an attack. Now, how are you planning to give an attack? Is you want to play a pawn to g4, then pawn to h4, pawn to h5, and that's how you're going to put so much pressure on your opponent, right? This is one of the best and the most played opening, the London system. In our future videos, I'm going to share few traps in the London system from the white side as well as from the black side too. So stay tuned for more such amazing videos. Till the time, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel and share with your chess friends. Thank you.